green light. Only takes one session of the European Union Council, to issue 500 billion a year, every year, for 5 years, 2.5 trillion, to fund this big business of the green transition. And Christine Lagarde, all she has to do is to say that I will stand by these bonds in the secondary bond markets. She wouldn't need to put in anything, because just by saying this, those bonds would sell like hotcakes. So this is something that one of Angela Merkel's top advisors told me once when he heard this proposal of mine. He said, "This is a good proposal." I thought, okay, you are advising Angela Merkel. Why don't you advise her to do it? He said to me, she will never do it. I said, okay, please explain your question. Why not? He said, look, don't you understand? Every time the German Chancellor, Merkel or whoever it might be, walks into a room with the French president, the French president keeps his mouth shut. Why? Because France is a structurally deficit country vis-a-vis the structurally surplus country, which is Germany. To put it bluntly, if tomorrow morning there's an announcement that the euro goes and we go back to our own national currencies, there's going to be a massive flow of money into Germany and out of France. So if you are the French president, right, you keep your mouth shut. In the end, you may kick and scream for a little bit, but in the end, what she says goes. The moment we do in Europe what I suggested, or we create a federation with a federal treasury, federal bonds, Eurobond, and so on, that ends. Because then Germany cannot leave the euro. It's not that Germany wants to leave the euro. Germany is the greatest beneficiary of the euro. And Merkel doesn't want to leave the euro. But in her handbag, she has a get out of the euro card, like in Monopoly, a get out of jail card, that Greece doesn't have. France, the deficit countries don't have. That card gives her enormous asymmetrical political power vis-a-vis the French president. And for me, I'm completely undogmatic. I don't care what governments use as labels. What matters is what people actually do. Right? So, for instance, I don't think, take Britain, which is a country I know very well. I don't think that Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, is more left-wing than Boris Johnson. If anything, Boris Johnson is doing things that Keir Starmer wouldn't do in favour of the working class. And this is a tragedy that we have as leftists speaking now. Look, Greece and Eastern Europe, we share a trait. We were seen by the surplus countries, the net exporters of Europe, as a vital space. What we had to offer them was markets and labor markets, as well as a space providing demand for their money. People ask me, why did Berlin accept Greece into the European Economic Community back in 1980, or into the Eurozone in the year 2000? What did Greece have to contribute? What do we produce? A little bit of olive oil, a few oranges. We're corrupt, poor. Why did they let us in? The answer in the case of Greece is not the labor force, because the labor force had already migrated to Germany in the 1950s. The Gastarbeiters, right? I mean, half the Greek labor force built Germany up, along with Italians and Yugoslavs, right?
And Turks.
And Turks. Let's not forget the Turks. No, but what we did have was no debt, which sounds really striking now and strange. But in 1980, the public debt of Greece was 30%, 35%. Private debt, zero. Even in 2000, when public debt had increased a lot during the 1980s and 1990s, even when we entered the Eurozone, the Greeks had no credit cards, no mortgages. I didn't know anybody back in 2000 who owed money to the bank. Because even if you asked for a loan, you wouldn't get it. People would actually work all their lives, and build a house when they were in their 50s or 60s. The idea of getting a loan to buy a house when you were in your 30s, that was completely absent. So what we brought to Deutsche Bank and Societe Generale and BNP Paribas was, okay, we were not rich, but we didn't owe money, and we owned our own homes. We were a dream for Western bankers who were, and especially when we got into the Deutschmark zone, the Eurozone, then we were the perfect partners. In the case of Eastern Europe, the countries of the Eurozone, the industrialized countries of the Eurozone, they found ready-made factories. So think of the expansion of Volkswagen and Audi and so on into Eastern Europe. They took over the existing factories, Eastern European factories, and they refurbished them with Skoda and so on. They imported huge quantities of human capital, well-educated Bulgarians, Romanians, so moved to Germany. A colleague of mine at the University of Berlin, of Humboldt University of Berlin, did a study, and he said that it was something like, in his estimation, he calculated the human capital that was imported into Germany since the accession of the Eastern countries was something like 200 billion. The amount of expertise that came cost 200 billion to the countries of Eastern Europe to create. And that was shifted. Supermarkets, Lidl everywhere. The development of underdevelopment. So, my country, your country, the countries of the East, we receive lots of money from the structural funds. Lots of money. That money usually ends up as aggregate demand for European companies that build the roads, that provide the materials.
Or in oligarchic circles.
Or oligarchic circles. So there is this kind of coalition that perpetuates a very imbalanced European Union. And I'm saying this not as an anti-Europeanist. I'm saying this as a Europeanist, because this is not the way to develop Europe. Remember Alexander Hamilton. The first thing he said when he became US Treasurer, the first Treasurer of the United States, was we need a common debt, because that will be the common bond that creates the common ethos of the United States. He was completely right. This insistence of not having a Eurobond, of not having a banking union, of doing everything it takes in order not to have a political union. This is what is keeping us apart. And when you are creating, going back to your gradualist tendencies, I said that in the book, I don't know whether you remember it, in the week Suffer What They Must. There are these two schools of thought, the gradualist school and my school, and the one that I belong to, which is not mine, were captured beautifully by François Mitterrand on the one side and Kohl, who were like we do what we can now. We take one step towards union, monetary union. Okay, that's what we can do. That's what we do. But there is the other side, Nicholas Kaldor, the Cambridge economist, who in 1971 was warning Europeanists, don't make the mistake of thinking that a monetary union is the first step towards a political union. Because when you create a monetary union, the centrifugal forces pulling Europeans apart will increase, and that will make a political union next to impossible or impossible. It is falling apart. It's already fragmenting. You can see there's a renationalization of almost everything. We now have borders again. We have renationalization of policy, of debt. Debt is concentrated again, Greek debt is concentrated again in the Greek banks, French debt in the French banks. We are having this constant fragmentation. I don't fear, let's not forget Brexit. Brexit is the result of these ridiculous policies in Brussels and in Frankfurt. Okay, first, this supposed clash between markets on the one hand and the state on the other is a fantasy. To begin with, in England, with the Industrial Revolution, without the state, there would have been no markets. Without this king's army, to evict the peasants from the land, there will be no commodification of the land, there will be no capitalism. The greatest impediment to freedom and prosperity, from where I'm standing, is concentrated power. Concentrated power, and I think this is something that Adam Smith would agree with, right? Well, not I think, I know. He was completely, aghast at the thought of concentrated power, either market power or government power. Concentrated power in the hands of Jeff Bezos, or a Bulgarian oligarch or a Greek oligarch, is detrimental to our capacity to breathe, to operate, to be creative. Similarly, I don't want to live in a communist regime like the one you had here. I know that if I lived in Bulgaria back in the 1970s and 80s, I would be in the Gulag. There's no doubt about that, right? I can see it from the Greek Communist Party, the way they look at me. I'm the prime candidate for the Gulag. So how can you have markets that work in a way similar to what Adam Smith was suggesting? But remember, Adam Smith was against the existence of public limited companies even, right? Because they would tend to become like the British East India Company. Markets that function, no control from the state, and no oligarchic power. For me, the answer to this is to have businesses that are naturally, as a result of the legal framework of their property rights and ownership rights, small or medium-sized. Now, you cannot have the state go to Facebook and say, we're going to chop you up into 20 pieces. How can you do that? You can't do that. Facebook is more powerful than any Senate. But imagine, and this is what I try to do in the book, imagine a situation where people working in a company are partners. Not equal in terms of our voting rights, but not necessarily in terms of our bonuses or our incomes. I don't know whether you read the book, but I try to...
Haven't still, yeah.
Okay. So in there, I give an example of how you could have a corporation on the basis of one person, one vote, with a mechanism, a voting mechanism, that will allow also for large disparities of incomes, even though we all have equal property rights, on the basis of peer assessment. In the same way in the universities, how do physicists decide who is a good physicist who needs to be awarded the Nobel Prize, right? It's not a state and it's not a market. It's peer assessment. So I was toying with this idea for many years, since the 1980s. But then I had an experience of working in the United States for a year for a company, which actually runs on this principle, and actually saw it work, and it worked magnificently.